Most Americans believe they have a general idea of whether they are on track for retirement. They know how much they earn, roughly how much they save, and they assume that Social Security and their retirement accounts will fill the gap. The problem is that very few people ever check the actual math behind this assumption. As a result, many retirement plans look reasonable on the surface but fail under basic numerical scrutiny. The core issue is not a lack of effort. Many people save consistently for decades. They contribute to 401ks, IRAs, and brokerage accounts. They avoid excessive debt and try to live within their means. Because of this, there is a strong belief that doing the right things automatically leads to a workable retirement outcome. In reality, behavior alone does not determine success. The math does. Retirement planning is fundamentally a math problem. How much money will be needed, how long it must last, and how fast it can reasonably grow. Most Americans never connect these variables in a single calculation. Instead, they rely on rules of thumb, vague targets or account balances that sound large but are never tested against real spending and time. Consider a simple example. A household plans to retire at 65 with $900,000 in retirement savings. That number feels substantial. However, if annual spending in retirement is $60,000, that portfolio must support withdrawals for 25 to 30 years. Even before inflation, this implies withdrawing 6 to 7% annually. When inflation is included, the pressure increases. Without checking this math, many assume the balance is sufficient simply because it looks large. Another common misunderstanding involves Social Security. Many people treat it as a solution rather than a partial component. If Social Security provides $2,200 per month, that is about $26,000 per year. For a household that spends $70,000 annually, this still leaves a $44,000 gap that must be covered by savings every year. Over 25 years, that gap alone totals more than $1.1 million before inflation. Few people ever write this number down. Longevity further complicates the equation. Retirement is no longer a short phase. A person retiring at 65 has a meaningful probability of living into their late 80s or 90s. That turns retirement into a 20-30-year financial obligation. Many plans implicitly assume a much shorter timeline, either by underestimating lifespan or overestimating investment returns. The consequences of ignoring this math are predictable. Plans appear stable for the first few years of retirement. When markets cooperate and expenses are manageable, problems emerge later when portfolios shrink faster than expected or when fixed income fails to keep up with rising costs. At that point, adjustments are difficult because time is no longer an asset. The key issue is not that Americans are careless. It is that most retirement plans are built without a complete numerical framework. People check account balances, not withdrawal sustainability. They estimate savings rates, not long-term spending coverage. They assume growth, but do not stress test outcomes. At this stage, the goal is not to fix the plan. It is to recognize the gap between confidence and calculation. Until the math is clearly understood, even disciplined savers may be relying on assumptions that do not hold up over time. To understand why so many Americans fail to check the retirement math, it helps to look at how retirement planning is usually approached. For most people, planning is fragmented. Income, savings, investments, and retirement expectations are treated as separate topics instead of parts of a single system. This fragmentation creates blind spots that are rarely challenged. Income during working years is relatively straightforward. Paychecks arrive regularly, expenses are paid monthly, and savings are treated as a percentage of income rather than as a future income source. Retirement changes this structure completely. Income stops being earned and starts being withdrawn. That shift alone requires a different way of thinking, but many plans never fully adjust to it. Behavior plays a major role. During accumulation years, progress is measured by account balances. Seeing a retirement account grow from $100,000 to $300,000 feels like success. This creates a false sense of security. What is rarely asked is how that balance translates into sustainable annual income. A large number without context feels reassuring, even if it cannot realistically support decades of spending. A common real world scenario illustrates this gap. Consider a couple in their early 60s with $1.2 million across retirement accounts. They assume they are well prepared. Their expected retirement spending is $80,000 per year. Social Security is projected to cover $30,000. That leaves $50,000 to be withdrawn annually from savings. Over a 25-year retirement, this requires $1.25 million in withdrawals before inflation. The math already fails on paper, yet many households in this position feel confident because the account balance appears strong. Another example involves younger professionals. A 45-year-old earns $120,000 and contributes 10% to retirement accounts. Financial advice often praises this behavior. However, if retirement spending is expected to be close to current lifestyle levels, that savings rate may be insufficient. Without projecting future expenses, longevity, and realistic returns, consistent saving can still lead to a shortfall. The problem is not effort, but lack of integration. Standard advice contributes to the issue. Rules like save 10-15%, aim for $1 million, or your expenses will drop in retirement are not inherently wrong, but they are incomplete. They simplify planning at the cost of accuracy. Expenses do not always decline meaningfully, especially when healthcare, insurance, and housing costs are considered. A target number is meaningless unless it is tested against spending and time. Another common assumption is that markets will take care of the math. Long-term average returns are often quoted, but retirement outcomes depend on sequence, inflation, and withdrawal timing. Averages do not pay monthly bills. Without stress testing scenarios, plans rely on optimism rather than calculation. The deeper problem is the absence of a system that connects inputs and outputs. How much comes in, how much goes out, how long it must last, and how inflation affects each part. When these elements are not linked, people plan emotionally instead of mathematically. This is why many Americans are surprised later in life. The plan did not fail suddenly. It was incomplete from the beginning. Until retirement math is treated as a single, connected equation, even well-intentioned strategies will continue to fall short. The retirement gap most Americans face is not caused by a single bad decision. It is the result of several common mistakes that are repeated quietly for years. Each one seems reasonable on its own. Together, they create outcomes that do not hold up over time. The first major mistake is confusing account size with retirement readiness. Many people focus on hitting a round number, $500,000, $1 million, or more. These numbers sound large, but without context, they mean very little. What matters is how much income the portfolio can realistically support. A $1 million portfolio does not mean $1 million to spend. At a 4% withdrawal rate, it supports about $40,000 per year before taxes and inflation. For households spending $70,000, $90,000 annually, this creates a permanent gap. Over 20 years, that gap compounds into hundreds of thousands of dollars. The second mistake is underestimating longevity. Retirement planning often assumes a 15-20-year horizon. In reality, retiring at 65 means planning for 25-30 years. Even small miscalculations become large over longer time frames. For example, underestimating retirement length by just 5 years at $50,000 per year results in an additional $250,000 in required funding before inflation. Most plans never account for this explicitly. The third mistake is relying on optimistic return assumptions. Many projections use historical average returns without adjusting for volatility, inflation, or withdrawal timing. A portfolio that averages 6 to 7% over decades can still fail if withdrawals occur during weak market periods early in retirement. This sequence risk is rarely modeled by individuals, yet it plays a critical role in long-term outcomes. Two retirees with identical portfolios can experience very different results based solely on timing. The fourth mistake is assuming income growth will solve structural problems. Higher earners often believe they can save their way out of poor planning. However, income does not change the underlying math. A household earning $200,000 that saves without understanding future spending and withdrawal limits faces the same risks as a household earning $80,000. The difference is scale, not logic. Poor structure compounds regardless of income level. The long term consequences are gradual but severe. After 5 years of retirement, the plan often appears intact. After 10 years, withdrawals begin to feel heavier, especially if markets underperform expectations. After 20 years, options narrow. Spending cuts become necessary. Lifestyle choices become constrained. In extreme cases, retirees are forced back into work or depend heavily on fixed income sources that no longer keep pace with costs. To illustrate the contrast, consider two scenarios. Scenario A: a retiree plans based on balance alone. They withdraw $60,000 annually from a $1 million portfolio, assuming average growth will cover it. After 20 years, the portfolio is depleted or severely reduced. Scenario B: a retiree plans based on sustainable income, adjusts spending expectations early, and aligns withdrawals with realistic assumptions. After 20 years, the portfolio remains functional, even if smaller. The difference is not discipline, intelligence, or earnings. It is decision making based on math rather than assumptions. Retirement plans fail quietly because the mistakes that cause them are rarely measured. When the consequences appear, the opportunity to correct them is often gone. The solution to the retirement math problem is not a new product or a higher return target. It is a shift from balance based thinking to income based planning. Instead of asking, "How much do I have?" the correct question becomes, "How much income can this realistically produce and for how long?" The first step is to define retirement spending in today's dollars. This means calculating annual expenses based on actual lifestyle needs, not optimistic assumptions. Housing, healthcare, insurance, food, transportation, and discretionary spending must all be included. Once this number is clear, it becomes the foundation of the entire plan. Without it, every other calculation is guesswork. The second step is separating guaranteed income from portfolio dependent income. Guaranteed income includes Social Security, pensions, or other fixed sources. These are relatively predictable and inflation adjusted to some extent. The remaining spending gap is what the portfolio must cover. This gap is the critical number most people never isolate. If annual expenses are $75,000 and guaranteed income is $30,000, the portfolio must reliably generate $45,000 per year. The third step is translating portfolio size into sustainable income. This is where withdrawal logic matters. Instead of assuming a fixed percentage will always work, the plan should account for time horizon, inflation, and variability. A conservative framework might assume a 3 out of 4% initial withdrawal, adjusted gradually over time. This is not a rule to follow blindly, but a stress-tested starting point. At 3.5%, generating $45,000 per year requires approximately $1.3 million in retirement assets. This number may be uncomfortable, but it is measurable and actionable. The mechanics of stability come from alignment, not optimization. Spending, income sources, and portfolio structure must match the time horizon. Short-term spending needs are covered by predictable income and cash reserves. Long-term needs are supported by diversified assets designed to grow at least modestly above inflation over time. This reduces the need to sell assets during unfavorable market conditions and limits the impact of short-term volatility. A key part of the system is flexibility built in from the beginning. Instead of locking into a rigid withdrawal amount, the plan includes adjustment ranges. In years of strong returns, spending can remain stable. In weaker years, small, predefined adjustments protect long-term sustainability. This approach lowers risk by responding to reality rather than resisting it. Why is this solution stable rather than risky? Because it reduces dependence on assumptions. It does not require markets to perform perfectly. It does not assume expenses will drop significantly. It does not rely on future income increases. It works by matching resources to obligations over time. Most importantly, this system turns retirement planning into a controlled process. Decisions are made based on math, not hope. The goal is not to maximize wealth, but to avoid predictable failure. When income, time, and spending are aligned, the retirement math stops being a source of anxiety and becomes a manageable framework. When all elements are combined, retirement planning becomes a structured system rather than a collection of assumptions. The core idea is simple. Spending defines income needs. Income needs define required assets, and assets must last for a clearly defined time horizon. When these elements are aligned, the math becomes transparent. A workable framework has four steps. First, define realistic annual spending in today's dollars. This includes fixed and variable costs and reflects actual lifestyle choices, not idealized estimates. Second, subtract reliable income sources such as Social Security and pensions. Third, calculate how much annual income must come from the portfolio and translate that into a sustainable asset requirement using conservative assumptions. Fourth, structure assets so short-term needs are separated from long-term growth capital, reducing pressure during market downturns. This framework changes outcomes gradually but decisively. After 1 year, the primary change is clarity. Instead of tracking account balances in isolation, progress is measured against income coverage. Decisions become easier because trade-offs are visible. Saving more, working longer, or adjusting spending are no longer abstract ideas. Each option has a measurable impact on the plan. After 5 years, the benefits compound. Portfolios aligned with income needs tend to experience fewer forced withdrawals during weak market periods. Spending is adjusted intentionally rather than reactively. Households that adopted this framework early often find that small course corrections made years in advance prevent large disruptions later. After 10 years, the difference is structural. Plans built on assumptions often drift off course, especially if markets underperform expectations or inflation rises faster than projected. Plans built on math remain functional because they were designed with margins. Flexibility exists not because of luck, but because the system anticipated variability. The practical actions to start are straightforward. Write down current annual spending and review it honestly. Estimate future spending categories that may rise, such as healthcare. Confirm projected Social Security benefits and identify any other fixed income. Calculate the remaining annual income gap and compare it to existing assets using conservative withdrawal assumptions. If the numbers do not align, the solution is not denial, it is adjustment. Adjustments can take several forms: increasing savings, extending working years, reducing expected spending, or a combination of all three. None of these choices are comfortable, but all are more manageable when addressed early. What matters is that the decision is intentional and based on math rather than hope. Retirement planning fails most often not because people ignore it, but because they simplify it too much. The math does not need to be complex, but it must be complete. When spending, time, and income are connected in a single framework, uncertainty decreases. The retirement math most Americans never check is not hidden or complicated, it is simply avoided. Checking it early does not guarantee a perfect outcome, but it replaces assumption with understanding. That shift alone is often the difference between a fragile plan and a durable one.